Hi, I'm here to basically talk about how to value towns in Massachusetts for taxation. My name is Chris Wilcock, and I'm with the Bureau of Local Assessment at the Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services. Today, we'll be going over a bunch of different ways on how assessors stay organized, used CAMA systems, and how they have their day-to-day operations, how they can improve their day-to-day operations using some technology. So the agenda for today we're going to discuss is what the Bureau of Local Assessment's role in municipalities is, what is CAMA. We're going to go over just different examples of tax maps, different types of data used in assessments. We're going to go over some best practices on data entry, and we're going to do some best practices on some other assessing functions. And at the end, I'll provide some online resources that I hope everyone can use. The first thing I want to make everyone aware of is our website. Every day we're adding specific content, different educational events, and this is, I would think of this as a fluid kind of web page that's always being updated. So if you haven't bookmarked this website, I would keep on doing it. I would encourage you to do it. And as you can see down here, one of the new changes to the website is to list all the upcoming webinars and different events that are happening with DLS. The Bureau of Local Assessment is basically responsible for oversight, regulation, training, and technical assistance for cities and towns pertaining to real and personal property valuation. We provide guidance, education, and documents to really help assessors excel at their job and maximize their resources in the property tax part of municipal finance. From time to time, we do trainings like this, and this year we've put out a lot of content, and we're going to continue to do that. So what is the Bureau of Local Assessment responsible for? As I said, it's 351, so all communities in Massachusetts. Our staff is comprised of 16 valuation professionals, and we service almost over 1,500 local assessors, whether you're full-time on an elected board, part of the office, or a clerk. So we provide all sorts of resources to not only assessors, but other people in municipalities and local officials. When you look at Massachusetts and you're talking about real estate, we're talking about $1.4 trillion of taxable value. And for the most part, that's residential value, and that's values that are basically coming to us every year from all 351 communities in Massachusetts. So 2.5 million real estate parcels, roughly 200,000 personal property accounts. And as part of the process, we also look at roughly 140,000 sales in a given year. So today we're going to talk mainly about the CAMA system and what is a CAMA system. The CAMA system is basically the software system that the assessors use on a day-to-day basis. And what it does is it basically organizes all the market data, inspection data, historical data, and all sorts of other data that's pertaining to assessed values and valuations in your community. A CAMA system it stands for Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal. So mass appraisal, basically, when you have all of that in a computer system, you maintain property data. You use it to value property. You use it to notify owners or send bills or prepare mailing lists for butters and other purposes. And the key thing is you're ensuring equity through uniform valuations. With this process, it takes all this data and it organizes it so that if you have to do the market, income, or cost approach, all your data is kind of stored in different sections of the system, and it allows you to run high-end reporting or see what's happening in the market. So on any day-to-day in an assessor's office, depending on the time of the year, you could be entering income information, you could be entering sales information, building permits, or you could just be running reports to see what's happened from last year. As far as the sales comparison approach, this is the approach that's used mostly for residential properties, and it's used to estimate the value based on sales data. So when you have a sampling of sales over a calendar year, we take those sales, and the CAMA system is a large model. And every year, based on those sales, what we're doing is we're checking all of the different tables, adjustments, and valuations to make sure that you're producing fair and equitable assessments. But part of that process is getting all the sales data in every month, entering the deeds, and really going over, any sales transactions. Did the use of the property change? Is it a new ownership? Is there permits? Sales data will basically set a flag in the system for you to maybe follow up more or come back to it at another point to analyze it. The other approach of value is a cost approach, and there's a Marshall and Swift manual that basically puts together all costs, how much it costs to build a house. So this is an approach that's also used for value. And basically what it does is utilizes market data for building. And what it does is it takes the depreciated value of any improvements, and it's based on a table of cost values, a price per square foot for certain types of things like roofs or framing or flooring types or even heating systems. So a CAMA system can also bring in cost data, which you can update. And if you're using a cost approach, the CAMA system will have everything organized for you. The income approach to value is mainly used for apartment buildings and commercial value properties and industrial properties. So the CAMA system will actually organize all the rents, all the expenses, vacancy rate, any market data that pertains to the income approach of value. There'll be a section in your CAMA software that you can really organize everything. One of the largest requests that assessors send out is income and expense every year. And what you're trying to do is see on those income properties what changed from the previous year. Are the rents going up? Do they incur more expenses? Was the building vacant at certain points? So it's very important with the income approach to make sure that you have that data every year, but you also have it organized so that when you do your reporting, you can pull out all sorts of market data that you get through the income and expense forms every year. Before we actually go into valuing a community, I thought it was important for us to define what we're valuing. Ad valorem taxation is basically used in all 351 communities to basically help bring in revenues for the budget. On average in Massachusetts, there's 70% of the revenues for a city and town comes through property taxation. So before we know how we get that in as far as revenues, how do we make it a fair process? We have to know where is our jurisdiction. This is an example of Boston. This is their jurisdictional boundary. So sometimes there might be breaks in the land with water. So you can see East Boston and it looks like Charlestown and different sections of Boston are not all touching, but they're part of the jurisdiction. So you want to know before you start listing any of the properties where your boundaries are. You might have islands. You might have, a certain section of town that might look like it belongs to another town. So just understanding where your jurisdictional boundaries are is the first step to defining all of the taxable or non-taxable properties. Once you define your actual jurisdictional boundaries, these are just some basic land information items that you would keep track in your CAMA system. Assessors could be working on this from time to time. if there's a new permit, or if the planning department approved a certain zoning or project. All these different items could change every day. I want to stress that a CAMA system is never 100%. You could have everything in as of that day. As soon as something changes the next day, that whole system has to be tested, and that system has to, you have to grab that data to pull it in. There's nothing that really stays the same in a community year to year. Everything's always changing. They might be small changes, like a sale or maybe a small development, but you always want to make sure that you're capturing anything that's out there. So for land info, what you really want to do is make sure that you know all the parcel IDs, which are a unique identifier in your jurisdiction. And also, we are requesting that you maintain a loc ID. And a loc ID is kind of the same as a parcel ID, but it's based on the whole state. Parcel IDs are very specific just to your jurisdiction. As soon as you go into a neighboring community, that parcel ID is completely different. How they do it in that abutting community is drastically different than how you do it in your community. One thing assessors also maintain is property addresses. You know, where do we send the bill? What are we talking about as far as the property address? So as developments go in, as possibly addresses change throughout the year, the assessors or the clerks in the office maintain all the property addresses based on any information they're getting from inside city or town hall or outside town hall. Lot size is very important. You might have something that's very small that's going to impact value. It's going to have, in most cases, a lower value than something that's very large that maybe could be subdivided, or maybe it can provide a higher level house or a larger project. So lot size and maintaining lot size is very important. The neighborhood of a property is very important also. Neighborhood analysis should be done yearly, but we'll definitely check in on the cert years just to make sure that your neighborhoods are defined based on the sales that you're seeing. If, for instance, there was a boundary on a neighborhood that you're seeing maybe the other side of the street, and the street being the line from one neighborhood to another, if you're seeing the other side of the street starting to maybe redo the houses and improve the properties, and that line is pushed across the street and includes those parcels, you know, you should redraw your neighborhood map to include those. A neighborhood should be a clustering of all similar type properties, as best as you can draw it, you know, with boundaries, whether it's a street boundary, maybe it's the jurisdictional boundary, so another town, maybe it's a water boundary, but every year you should look at them, and if there's a clustering of sales that's right on the line, maybe that boundary needs to change on those neighborhoods. So it's something we do look at. Zoning could impact things. We're seeing a lot of zoning around rail stations and smart growth corridors. If an industrial property changes to allow, you know, mid to high story apartment buildings, that could have a severe impact on the value. And you might get a sale that comes in and you might see a huge value. Basically, they're buying that possibility of maybe that new zoning change. But it's something that you want to work with your planning department or someone in city or town hall to make sure that you have the most accurate zoning, and that when there's any changes that you reflect that in your CAMA database. Public utilities could be an issue. Some communities have septic systems compared to local sewer systems. That could impact value. The size of the lot could be contingent on where you put that septic system. So knowing the public utilities could have an impact on value. It's something that most CAMA companies or software packages do track, but it's something that could change from time to time. A view factor. When people buy homes, you know, they're always looking location, location, location. If something's abutting the water, you know, that would be a positive view adjustment. If maybe there's something abutting an active rail line or maybe a highway, that's an example of something that could be a negative view adjustment. Or if there's an industrial use, something could impact it positive or negative. So it's always good to understand what's in your system, and constantly go through the sales to see if they support those view factors. There's other adjustments that you can make to the land information, which is traffic. Maybe there's a busy street that sells a little less than the street directly behind it. There are adjustments that you can look at for traffic. If the houses are selling the same and you have a large sampling, maybe it's time to look at that traffic adjustment to see if that's warranted or not. So what are the sources to get all this land information? Number one would be the Registry of Deeds. Some assessors are on there or have reports sent to them daily. Some assessors will do it weekly, and some will actually do it monthly. I'd like to stress, as fast as you can get those deeds in the system, I think the better it is to just find out how the week or the month or how the year is going to go. If your sales are coming in and they're all over the place, you might have to go out and inspect those properties, because it severely will impact the values that you're setting that upcoming year. So, looking at the deeds, knowing what's coming in, getting the correct ownership on there, getting the correct mailing address, those are all important things. And the Registry of Deeds should have a process for either sending you via email or through the internet, through emails or postage mail, snail mail. You should be getting something from them at least every month. Planning boards also have dockets or projects that once they stamp them could impact values. So that's another source. You want to make sure that you're in touch with your planning department or your zoning professional in your city or town hall, because any zoning could impact value. And if it's not in there, when you get that sale, you won't know why that's happening. And like a couple things I mentioned, smart zone, the zoning around the MBTA, you might see people investing a lot of money in those properties where typically they didn't in the past. As far as municipal GIS, that's a system that every year, I think most people maintain their tax mapping through that. But there's also other in-house data, whether the DPW is doing some data improvements on it, or maybe Mass GIS is providing some content. You might get some information from your GIS source. Maybe there's something happening with a change in an impact from wetlands. That's an example of something you would see on the GIS system that could possibly impact value. Historical tax maps. Sometimes things are in the GIS system, or some things are in the GIS mapping and there's an error. So having the ability to go backwards to maybe the Mylars or historical maps is very important, because you can see the status of the maps before they were digitized. So historical tax maps are a valuable thing to have. They're a permanent record, and you should have at least a couple copies. And sometimes you have to go back. Maybe it's a name of a owner, but they're very important to have. Aerial photography is great to have. Sometimes you catch changes, unpermitted work, maybe some things that are happening out there that you wouldn't normally see just driving up a street or in a typical day. So looking at aerial photography is a really good thing. And there's lots of sources. If you don't have that internally, as far as a contract or software, Mass GIS does have some options for you. And then one of the other things is survey data. Sometimes there's plans in your office. Sometimes people bring in plans through abatement processes or through building permits. So sometimes the survey data can really help as far as wetland delineation or property boundaries. So as far as property info, there's a lot. We're going to get to kind of just the highlights, but if you look at a property record card, there's endless amounts of data. But what I wanted to do is pick a couple different things and just explain them. So property ownership is important. When we talk about property taxation, there are properties in our jurisdictions that are not taxable based on who the owner is. So it's very important for us to know if a tax exempt property sells, if that new owner is carrying that status. If it's selling from a tax exempt and going to a taxable, I think it's very important to know that, so that you can get the paperwork out and discuss that with the taxpayer to say, hey, you purchased the property and we will be sending you a tax bill. It's no longer tax exempt. So monitoring those deeds and looking at that from time to time is important. A property use. So whether it's a building department, planning department, whether you just drive up the street and you see something that's being used as a commercial property that you have listed as residential. So property use definitely impacts any communities that have a split rate, but it also changes how you value the property. So property use is something that you should not only put in the system, but you should constantly check as you're out in the field. Legal references come from deeds. So that could be in the system through land court or from a regular deed. But that's something you always want to have, because that would explain the boundaries of the property, who bought it, what the consideration was, so some sales information. So legal references are extremely important to maintain, because if that property owner comes in and says, I have a ½ acre and you have me for 2 acres, you can go to see what the bounds of that property based on their sales and their last legal reference. And you can look up previous sales also if you have to go back to research things. Owner's mailing info, very important, not only to assessing, but sometimes that database is shared to other departments in city or town hall. If they're looking to do a mailing for certain things, you have all of the tax payers or the residents, and you can break them out by use. If you're looking for just residents, so residential properties, you can provide a list to the mayor, selectman, town manager, town administrator, because you're constantly maintaining that to make sure that the tax bills go to the right person. Property notes are important. If anything drastically is happening on a property, if they were in chapter land and they went out of chapter land, if there's something with the size of the lot, or maybe some history with the lot, it's important for us to maintain some property notes, especially with the changeover in assessors. You just want to let someone know if there's an adjustment or something that's a little unique for that property. It's always good to put a property note. Any large adjustments on land or building, just get in the habit of putting property notes. If it's a property that's split, put property notes. You know, it was split from this original parcel on this date. And then that way, if a new assessor comes in or someone checks it a couple of years down the line, they can see, okay, well, it was split from this property, and they have a complete picture. Historic assessments are important also. Sometimes we just look year to year, but maybe you want to look at trends in your community. Maybe you want to go 5 years back and see what's happened with the real estate market. Having those historic assessments gives you the ability to pull that information out and do high-level trending reporting, maybe to answer a question, or to maybe set things up, or maybe to review something further. You can identify maybe some trends over multiple years instead of just year to year. So having everything very organized as historic assessments is important. Permit activity. You want to make sure that you're out to see anything that changes. Permit activity is not always a positive change. It could be a negative change also. For instance, if someone demolishes a property and you send them a tax bill and they've already gotten rid of that shed, garage, or maybe it's a full house, you want to make sure that you're constantly going out there and making sure that what you're billing and what you put in your system as of the assessment date is actually what's out there. And permits are a great way to really flag those properties that need a review. This is an example of just mass land records. So every county has all the deeds, it has plans, sometimes it has mortgages and other financial documents. So if you go to this mass land records, you can actually see what documents are in your community, and you should be getting those routinely. But if you ever have to go back for historical information, these are all the different counties that have that information. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick look at some of the questions that came up. Okay, so we had a question about neighborhood code boundaries. Can they be scattered through an entire town? Absolutely. You know, I would say clusters is the best way to go. You don't want to have one parcel in the middle of 50 parcels that's coded differently. And if that's a situation, maybe it's an estate setting, maybe there's something odd with the property based on the use, or it's just not like anything around it. That's very rare. For the most part, you want to identify large clusters of land. It's not as surgical. You don't want to be too surgical, but you do want to have some boundaries of maybe housing stocks, or maybe some geographic boundaries, or you know, historic neighborhoods. Sometimes you know, there might be a certain section of town that's this section. It's a geographic area, and when realtors sell houses, they say, you know, selling in the Highlands or selling in, you know, the downtown area. If there's those defined areas, that is good. But you do want to have a large clustering. You don't want it to look like one of those abstract art things where they just take the paintbrush and throw it against the you know, the paper. So you want to make sure that there's groupings, and you want to make sure that those groupings have a healthy sampling of properties, because you do look at the sales in those properties. And if you don't have an accurate number of sampling parcels, your analysis is not going to be the best, because you're not going to have the sample size. So I would stress having a little larger than you know, 100 parcels, whatever in your community is a large enough area to look at. Does a change from exempt to non-exempt impact new growth? So new growth is the first time it's added to the tax roll. So yes, that would be new growth. There's probably some situations that you might want to call us on if something's gone on, off. But if it's the first time that it's on there, you know, yes, it is new growth, and that should be there, and it's a change in use. So there's a financial benefit for keeping up with tax exempt properties to make sure that you maximize growth. Who and how is the GIS map updated? So Peter, on that, there's 351 answers to that. For the most part, local municipalities and specifically the assessing department or the assessors are responsible for updating tax mapping. Either you have Mylars or you have GIS. I believe everyone has some form of GIS at this point, but the assessors have to update tax mapping and parcel mapping. So we're part of the GIS. I know there's all sorts of different layers on it. The Mass GIS has a certain software platform that they can give. I don't know if it's a purchase, but they have some resources if you don't have anything in-house. I will go over those a little later. But as far as making map edits, the assessor should have something in their budget, or they should be updating tax maps every year as things change. Okay, just bear with me 1 second. So as far as building permit data, building permits, planning data, and zoning. So you just want to make sure that, you know, that you're going to your building office and you're really getting all of those changes. I don't know how much common knowledge this is, but I know sometimes we might run into maybe the office isn't giving us information. And I just want to make all the assessors aware that this is actually in Mass General Laws. It's under Chapter 143, Section 61. And it basically says that the building office has to provide all of the construction information to the assessors. I think it says within 7 days. You know, use your best judgment. If you get it monthly, I think that's okay. But there is something that is in Mass General Laws to just deal with this. You shouldn't feel awkward about asking for permit information, because that's a red flag of that property is probably going to change as far as the data, and you want to go out and inspect that property. What's a healthy sampling for clustering? I think that it depends on the size of your community. I would say a healthy sampling is enough sales to complete a thorough analysis. So I know that's a very vague answer to it, but you want to look at, are you getting enough sales? If you have, 100 properties and you only have one sale every 5 years, I would say that that sampling size or that neighborhood might be too small. So what you're looking at is clustering of similar neighborhoods or similar parcels that have a good sampling of sales that you can use to value the land in those neighborhoods. And I understand, it's all 351. Some communities have a very small amount of parcels and some have hundreds of over 100,000. So it is unique. I would say work with your advisor in your community from the Bureau of Local Assessment, and they can definitely help you define what a healthy sampling is in your community. Yes, so tax-exempt properties do file a 3ABC form. That's something that you send out every year. We have some resources on our webpage, some really detailed guidance about that process. So if anyone wants to follow up on it, definitely feel free to look into it. But yes, there is an annual filing depending on what kind of tax-exempt entity you are. For instance, state or local buildings, they would not file, but something that is tax-exempt in another situation or another ownership would. So feel free to reach out if you can't find that, but we have a great multi-page document just talking about that. All right, so let me just go to the next slide. So I'll answer this last one about CAMA and the use of neighborhood data. So depending on, you could have the same house in two sections of a jurisdiction. One could be in a setting that has a nice view, a large kind of lot, a very favorable lot setup as far as frontage and just the maybe the distance from the houses. And that same house, based on that land value, the total value could be a lot more based on that house in that neighborhood. Now, if you pick that house up and you go to another part of the neighborhood where maybe the houses are a little smaller, maybe maybe the lots are a little smaller. Maybe it's on a section of town that might have noise from a rail line or a highway, or the views aren't as good and people aren't investing as much money into that neighborhood. That same house on that same lot, the total value would be lower. And what the difference would be is the house is the same in both situations, but the land is different. So based on the neighborhood codes, you would be tracking what the land values are in the higher neighborhood and the lower neighborhood. So that house could be on either lot and the house value would be the same, but the neighborhood and that lot, even if it's the same size, sometimes is different. If you have waterfront property, or maybe you have a mountain view, or there's something, maybe the neighborhood is up in elevation, so you have nice views, that would impact it, even if the lot size is the same. So when you're looking at neighborhood data, it's basically the lot pricing is different. Maybe there's something that's the size is related as far as setbacks, frontage. Maybe it's the exact same and it's just in a different part. So neighborhood data impacts it, and the real estate agents say it all the time: location, location, location. So it's basically determining what that buildable lot is in two parts of a jurisdiction. And precisely how they would do it is a neighborhood code. So in your CAMA system, there's neighborhood codes, and they would be applied to each one. Peter, I'm going to ask you to reach out to me. There's a lot of resources for this, but I just want to continue on with just the different things. I'm more than happy to answer that after the presentation, but I just want to get into some of the building fields. As far as different building fields, so when you go out to a property, you're looking at building style. So is it a colonial? Is it a cape? Is it a ranch? You're putting all that in, and on the CAMA system, there's a different price per square foot. There's a different standard size. So all the styles have different calculations in a CAMA system. It's crucial that whoever's out in the field is consistently putting the same things in whether it's this inspector or maybe it's the assessor or an assistant, everyone has to be calling a cape or a colonial. You will run into situations where you get to a house and you go, I don't know. It looks like a raised gambrel. Do we have that grade? So sometimes you can't do it, but I would encourage each office, if that's a problem, to not put anything, come back in the office, talk about it, and then put it in, because the price per square foot is different on all styles. Same thing with grading and condition. You want to have a conversation with anyone that's putting information into your system that when you talk about a high grade property in your jurisdiction, you're talking about this. When you're talking about a very good condition as far as how it kept up over the years, the owner of the property is constantly maintaining it. It might be a 1960s house, but it looks like a brand new house. That would be a very high building condition compared to something that was built in the 1960s and had minimal kind of changes, maybe just a roof, maybe some windows, and it just kind of is exactly what it was built at. So building condition, grade, style, that's something that anyone that touches the data or goes for inspections, everyone wants to be on the same page, because you can really have some problems if the data entry is not consistent. Year built, for the most part, is an easy thing. It's when the house was actually built. Some of the historical homes, it's hard to get that number. There's all sorts of ways to do it, whether you have a historic committee in the community that can research that for you. But year built is year built. That's kind of a black and white thing. As far as building size, that's very definitive as far as how you measure it. So in Massachusetts, we measure everything from the outside of the house. Condos are the one exception that sometimes the square footage is inside. If it is done on the outside, it should be done for that whole development on the outside. So if you have maybe duplexes or standalone condos and whoever put it in the system did it from the outside, you have to make sure that that's consistent. You can't take one unit and go from the inside and one from the out. Everything other than condos is the outside measurements. So when you actually pull up to a property, you start measuring on the outside. You're not really going into the inside of the house unless you're talking about finished or unfinished areas. And then you might have to estimate where that line is on finished and unfinished. But everything should be done from the outside. As far as room counts, most systems don't have any value associated with it. So if you have a 2,000 square foot house that has 10 rooms compared to 5 rooms, maybe an open concept compared to a traditional use, it's still 2,000 square feet. So most assessing systems do not value room count. Bedroom count, sometimes there's a value associated with it, especially if there's a septic system or some reason to do it. That's specific on each community. But again, the size of the house usually dictates it. If it's a 2,000 square feet of finished area, that's where the bulk of the value is. Bathroom counts do actually add value in. So if you have a house that has 1 bathroom compared to a house with 2.5 bathrooms, there will be an increase based on how many extra full or half bathrooms or even 3/4 bathrooms. So that is maintained when you go out to the property. Finished area, unfinished, anything that's above grade, so above the basement that's finished is finished area. And then even in the basement, you could have finished sections, but it's not as high as the first floor. So anything from the first floor up is the highest as far as price per square foot that's finished. Anything below grade could be finished, but usually it has some kind of factor on it because it's below grade. As far as building material data, Marshall and Swift is an example of a catalog that comes out that you can review the cost kind of approach to valuation. Maybe you can update building costs based on that manual, but it's something you should talk to either with your vendor, or you should look at your building tables to see, when the last time you looked at things. Inflation's happening. Sometimes there's spikes in building materials. You want to look at your tables to make sure that you're capturing the correct amount of money for those improvements. Let's see. So as far as something that was not captured, so if it's the first time that you're taxing it, yes, it would be new growth, even if it was done a couple of years ago. Perfect example would be someone sells a house and you do a sales verification on it, and you find out there was unpermitted work in the basement and they finished it. Yes, you would add it, update the card based on the sales verification, and you would basically say there's new growth because I changed the price per square foot on that basement to finished, which increased the value X amount of dollars. Outbuildings, extra fixtures, extra feature items. It could be in-ground pools, sheds, garages, sometimes patios. There's a whole bunch of outbuildings and extra features that are in CAMA systems. I would encourage you to visit it. If you can, based on market data, determine what the improvement is worth based on 2 different sales, I would definitely do that. So let's see. So as far as guidance on grades and conditions, since they're very unique to communities, I would work with your advisors. So going back to the 16 valuation professionals that BLA has, they know your communities very well. If you're new in the community, chances are that advisor was in that community with the previous assessor. Each community should have a manual or some kind of document that explains these different things. We do have guidance as far as how to create it, but because each municipality is a little different, I would work with your advisor and definitely feel free to ask those questions and have something in writing. As far as values of bathrooms and fair values for other various things, there are tables that are in your CAMA system that you can look at and then have an opinion one way or another. You know, when was the last time they were updated? Do I feel that this is the true market value for adding that shed or adding that garage? It's not necessarily the cost value. So if you go to get a $5,000 shed and you put in your yard, it doesn't mean that you're adding $5,000 of value. Sometimes you get 50% back. Sometimes you get 75% back. Sometimes you get very low dollars back. So you just want to go through your difference and you want to look at if there was a house that 2 houses that sold, one had a shed, one didn't. Everything else was identical. They were right next to each other. What was the difference in price from the one with the shed compared to the one without the shed? Sometimes you have sales to prove that, sometimes you don't. Our CAMA tables online. All your CAMA tables are actually in your CAMA system. So I would work with your CAMA vendors to find out how to, how to get that. But yes, all the CAMA tables are in your system, and there should be some kind of report or export to see what those values are. So as far as building sketches, this is an example of probably a hard sketch to do. This is a very large apartment building, but every property has a sketch associated with it, as long as it's a freestanding building. Sometimes condos are either sketched or they have undisplayed areas. For the most part, we're trying to clean up the finished and unfinished sections of those, but for every other type of property, you're going to have a sketch like this. So when an assessor comes to a property like this, there's 2 situations. One, they have a sketch here that they're validating or they're verifying the measurements. And then sometimes they get to a house and there's a blank sheet. So the assessor would have to go in and basically start from scratch. They would have a blank box like over to the right-hand side. And I don't know if this is going to work. You know what? I'm not going to try it. So basically they would draw this house. They would define what this porch is. If this is truly just a square house that's 2 stories, it would just be a polygon. But you would have this porch area separate. So when you actually looked at the sketch, you would be able to tell unfinished porch compared to 1st and 2nd floor, and then possibly a basement underneath. Sketching does get a little tricky. So here's an example of something that might be really hard to sketch. you know, when you're looking at curved walls compared to something that's boxed off. So again, you might encounter property where either you don't have a good sketch or there's nothing in the system. So if your system allows you, you can actually draw this circle. If this system allows you, you can build these, you know, bump outs and really put what you're seeing here on the paper. My intent was to sketch this and it just didn't work. So we'll have some kind of sketching professional development in the near future, but this is something that you could encounter. When you're pulling tape on a house, and this is a perfect example, not only are you checking the measurements from, you know, let me just bear with me one second. All right. I hope everyone can see my cursor. Not only are you pulling measurements from the front, but you also want to look up too. You can see that this front section stops here, where when you go to this section, it includes possibly a 3/4 or a 1/2 story above this second floor. So it's very important, not only when you're pulling tape to look at the ground, but also look up for every section as you go around the house. My personal style is to go left, so go clockwise around the house, and then again draw in all the boxes. So if this is 2 stories compared to this as 2.5, oh, I guess you can't see my cursor, so bear with me one second. All right, onto it. I'm sorry about the cursor, but as far as this house goes, if you're looking at the left front corner, I would go clockwise around. And what you're really trying to do is look up, because there's certain sections of that polygon or that section of the house that might be 2 stories compared to 3. And then the next house I wanted to put in here, I thought this was a funny thing. Do you have to sketch this? Yeah, you have to sketch it. Is it going to be easy? No, it's not. From time to time, assessors or inspectors will basically come up to properties like this. This is kind of an extreme example, but yes, you should have something in your system that defines what's finished, what's not, the story height, and you might have a building style that's in there that's very unique. But yeah, shame on me for taxing the old lady in the shoe, but everything in Massachusetts is taxable. And even if it was tax exempt, we still would list it and sketch it, but you might run into these types of properties. So everything that we talked about is kind of basic data points. I think the most important thing with data entry, learn your CAMA software, master all the CAMA processes. Whether you're going to professional development from the vendor, through the assessing association, through some of our things, you can read a lot of different manuals and get up to speed pretty fast. Some of the benefits of COVID is there's a lot of online tutorials. There's lots of YouTube or video kind of resources. So if you're new to a software package, if you're new to a community, it's in your best interest to understand how that CAMA software works. Because when you start putting the data in, you're going to know the impacts of what's happening. The second thing is, reach out to either support or reach out to another community that has the same software. Chances are they can answer some questions and really help you out. So don't feel that you're alone with any of the software packages. Reach out to the vendor, either through the support, or reach out to an assessor. If you're having trouble, talk to your advisor. We'll find help. But when we have the meetings with different vendors, we're really asking about what they provide as far as different packages of manuals or professional development for their software. Everything is computerized. If you don't understand how that works, your assessments are not going to be the best. So if you want to maximize your time and resources, spend some time and understand how that CAMA system works in your community. And as far as manuals, there is no shortage of documentation for all of those things. Sometimes it's a little difficult, it's overwhelming, but just start with the basic functions that you do on a day-to-day kind of day-to-day office, and then expand out. Don't go too much into the advanced until you understand the basic functions. Let's see. So net living area of basements, anything below grade, it's above grade finished area. Sometimes there's calculated totals in your system that includes a basement or not, but GLA should be above grade finished area. And that's usually defined either by USPAP or the appraisal standards. And that's something that we use. But I have seen some software systems that track just finished area, which includes basements. And it is a little confusing for some people, but it should be above grade. As far as changing market assessments 90 to 110%, no, with Prop 2.5, let's do some extremes. As far as property values, if it's going up 30%, based on Prop 2.5, you can only go up with your levy. So what that does is when you have, a huge year as far as market values going up, your tax rate is lowered. As far as the statistical analysis that's over or under 10% from at 100% market value, I wouldn't recommend going away from that. We don't have any plans to do that. We're constantly looking at the market. As I showed you, we have 140,000 sales roughly a year throughout the Commonwealth. But there is no plan to consider that change of 90 to 110%. Basically, you're allowed 10% over the 100% or 10% lower than the 100%. And as far as raising in values, as long as you have the sales to support it, you should be able to get it in that range. So if you're having troubles with that, feel free to reach out to your advisor, myself, a supervisor at local assessment, and we're more than happy to work with you to help with those sales. Let's see, just bear with me. Mass does require full market value as of the assessment date. So as of the previous January 1st, everything should be at 100% market value. When we look at the 90 to 110, that allows, people might come in at 94%, 95%, but what we're trying to do is get to 100% of market value every year. If that doesn't happen, you're going to see large swings. So in the early 2000s, when interim adjustments weren't as popular as they are now, you would see communities not change their values for a few years, and then all of a sudden either they had a reval or they had 1 year where they changed the values and you saw a 30 or 40% increase. That's very hard for assessors as far as abatements, as far as explaining what happened. So I would definitely say that we're doing it as far as requesting every year. You should have a healthy sales sampling. And if you don't have enough in a year, you can go out past 1 year of sampling. But I would strongly recommend that we have full value every year just to keep up with the real estate market. So different data entry roles, the assessor probably would have the most permissions in a CAMA system for changes. As far as any clerk or assistant assessor, they might have certain functions in the CAMA system that they can't do or that they don't even see. The assessor really should know how that system works. The last thing you want to do is have someone that might be new to the office make a change that impacts value that the assessor doesn't know about. So there's certain functions that are in CAMA or certain permissions that the assessor has that maybe other staff does not have. You should definitely check to see what's in your system because, again, you don't want someone coming in and making a change that impacts value that you don't know about or that isn't warranted. As far as Board of Assessors, depending on how your board is, whether it's an active board that's involved with the values or you present the values, permissions could change depending on what the setup is in your jurisdiction. Okay, I'm going to go quickly through this. So This is an example of, someone might go into an assessor's office and they see, the assistant, the clerk, or the assessor head down, just entering all this stuff in. So what typically is data entry as far as an assessing office? It's sales data from either MLS for verifications or mass land records for deeds. Inspection data, you're out there, every property has to get inspected once every 10 years. So they might be entering new inspections. Income and expense data they're entering. CAMA will track exemptions that come in. So maybe maybe it's July 1st and they're putting all the exemptions in. Cost data. Maybe there was a change to the cost manual and you're just looking at your costs, and any change in, hardwood floors or heating systems or something. Maybe you're changing something in your system based on that Marshall and Swift or other cost manuals out there. Land data, what's changing as far as new developments, changing in use, taxable, non-taxable, chapter lands. There's a lot of land data changes that happen in a given year. Same thing with mapping data. You might have a new flyover and you might have some things that you're seeing on there that you didn't have in your CAMA system. So mapping data sometimes helps with reviewing and possibly changing some land data in your CAMA system. And ownership data would go hand in hand with sales data. You're always trying to make sure you have the current owner, current mailing address, and current book and page. Those are extremely important to have. Best practices. I'm going to take a quick look at some of these. So if a homeowner does not allow an interior inspection, this is very popular with this new kind of COVID environment we're living in. You want to make sure that you validate what you have in your system. So whether you ask the homeowner at the door, whether you send the homeowner a survey or a property record card to ask them to validate it, or whether you look at maybe some information on MLS, if they don't allow you into the interior, there's no law that allows us to force our way in. So the next best thing is just to verify what's on your, in your system. Did they have any permits? Has the house sold recently? Where else could I validate that? Maybe the homeowner will answer a phone call or an email to just say, yep, nothing's changed. I still have, 2.5 bathrooms and 4 bedrooms, and they can walk through all the data points with you. As far as the sales with flips, there's a whole coding for sales, and that's a process of sales verification. So if a property was a distressed property was bought, there was a permit taken out, and then it was sold, there might be a point where those sales don't match, or they're culled out because they're not arm's length transactions from our sampling for setting the values. So there's a whole list of different codes, but yes, there's a lot of flipping. There's a lot of properties that are distressed. Maybe they're selling the property as is with furniture inside, and it really hasn't been upkept. So we would discount those sales because obviously the condition that it was left in, the requirement of maybe having dumpsters to empty it out, maybe the inside was worse than we knew. Sometimes we discount that sale based on what the property sold, how the property sold. There's a whole list that we have of sales codes, but what you're mentioning, David, is listed in a couple of those codes. So Peter, we'll follow up with a land discussion after this. I just want to get through these slides, and if I have time at the end, I can definitely answer things. So as far as assessing, good data in, good assessments out. You want to limit appeals and errors, and you want to maximize growth and accuracy. I think that if you put this in place, you're going to maximize the resources that you have in your assessing office. When I say maximize growth, know where things are changing and make sure you capture that growth as they're changing. Make sure your cost tables and your CAMA system is updated so you're capturing the true market value and you're not having a lower value because maybe the cost tables need to be updated. So going out to see the properties, really going through anything that's happening in a community will make sure that you maximize your growth and accuracy and in turn maximize public confidence. There's nothing worse than going to a property and someone across the street just did a large renovation, and you build the person that you're going to inspect at one level across the street didn't capture that new permit. And now you're looking at a brand new house and you have it as an older house, a distressed property. So keeping up with that is not only good for growth and accuracy, but it really improves public confidence. If that is a brand new house, that first year you're taxing it. There is a delay sometimes based on when we capture growth as far as when it hits the tax rolls. But for the most part, you want to maximize that growth or that additional value that first year. And you don't want that to be in that situation where the surrounding parcels are paying the same as a house that drastically had some changes. So as far as developing a plan, the municipal calendar is probably the best thing to have. A clerk that I worked with actually took all the assessing dates and actually put that into her Outlook calendar. So there is a municipal calendar that really goes over all the different things. So definitely put that out there. And then there's also city and town will go into it in a work plan. So develop a plan. Keep up with deeds. How often should you run a sales report? Every time there's a large batch of deeds, or anytime that deeds are entered into CAMA. So if you're doing monthly updates, make sure that update has you're running some kind of sales on it. You don't want to wait a year to look at the sales. If you have to inspect a property based on what's happening, you want to make sure that you maximize your inspection. So looking at the sales, running sales reports is just a great way to keep up with things. CAMA reports, what's happening in the CAMA system. These are all different examples of what's happening in the system. So feel free to run these reports, really go through and find out what's happening, but there's all sorts of canned reports. These are some examples that really could help out. Just to find out what's happening. The LA4 is the total value, but all those other reports, permit, inspection reports, all that stuff is extremely important to find out, what's happening at any given time in your CAMA system. Property inspections. This is a question that we do get all the time. Here's a calculation as far as what you should be inspecting annually. Your total parcels divided by a 10-year term equals your annual inspection target. So if you have 9,000 parcels over 10 years, you roughly should be hitting about 900 inspections per year to keep up with the cyclical standard. Sometimes people wait until the end of the cycle to do it. This is a running 10 years. So at this year, you should look at your inspection report. Anything that you haven't visited in at least 10 years should be added to the cyclical report. Anything that goes outside of that is a priority, just to make sure you're there. You shouldn't wait for the reval. You shouldn't wait for the cert year or the third year check-in. This should be every year. There's things that change, and the only way to really capture that is to go out in the field or to inspect these properties. Transparency is key. When you call someone, letting them know, what you're going out to do. So having your assessments online is a really good thing. It shows a Reader's Digest version of the software that you have in-house, and it really shows how you value different properties. Someone can research their property, the property across the street, and as long as all that information is in there, they can fact check across the street and have a comfort level that they're not being over-assessed compared to a property in the jurisdiction. So online assessment databases is a great tool to have. Same thing with mapping. If you have land adjustments and you want to show people this, your land area is twice the size of your next door neighbor. That's why the value is higher. You can show based on mapping and GIS, this is the size of the property, and this is why the value is higher from this property to that one. As annual assessment documents, whether it's your commitment lists or or maybe it's a sales document. Those are great to have on a website. Informative assessing websites. I could talk for hours about just this topic, never mind all the other things that assessors do. So anything that's important as far as, once you send bills out, the abatement process, excise tax, get as much information as you have on your website so that people can find those answers. They're more likely to research that before they call you or email you. So by building up your website, it really helps create some public confidence, and people will go and seek that information. Historical assessments are something that we definitely have in CAMA, and based on the online databases, that is a function that you have. Simple prepared explanations. We all get 5 questions, the most common questions, every year, around a certain time, like excise questions or abatement questions, or maybe exemption questions. Pick the top 5 in your office and have something on your website, or maybe have something at the front counter for the staff, so that everyone's on the same page. It's a high level answer, and it's really a thought out answer, because you'll see a pattern of the same question being asked. And it's nice to have a prepared explanation to basically answer that question for someone at the front counter. Online forms are a great thing to have, abatement forms or exemptions, anything that you can put online. Forms a list or income and expense. It's a good thing to have. Again, people will research your website before. Some GIS resources. We talked about mapping. Mass GIS has this mass mapper, and people can go in and type in their community and see all the parcels, some flyover information, and all sorts of other information overlaid on their parcels in their own community. So Mass GIS has Mass Mapper, and it has a couple other things. So definitely feel free to go to their website and use their tools. I know this was a lot, and when I decided to actually talk about the subject, I knew that even if it was a 10-hour spot, I couldn't hit everything. So my last slide is basically to provide additional questions and resources. And I think that these are the 4 places that everyone should definitely go to. The first being the Municipal Finance Training and Resource Center on our website. You'll find all the topics. Peter, you'll find answers about your land questions and how we value things. Feel free to go there. We've built up a YouTube page. So when you're explaining, excess levy capacity to a resident or an elected official, or maybe you're just trying to get someone, up to speed, there's all these available YouTube videos, including the one we're doing right now, that will be on the DLS YouTube page. So the direct link will be right from our website to the YouTube page, and we're constantly adding more and more content. Pretty much everything from the 101 courses on there, and it's broken up into some very nice sound bites with some great visualization. The MAAO, Mass Association of Assessing Officers, they continuously have professional development, they have designation programs, and they can talk about any one of these slides probably for a whole week. So if you're looking to get to the next level, if you're looking to get up to speed, reach out to the MAAO. They have a lot of mass specific education, and they have a course 200, which really goes into all the different processes that Massachusetts assessors kind of go through, and it's a really in-depth look at the role of an assessor. Anyone that's new to this profession, you have to educate, and it's not a one and done. You have to continue to educate. Laws changes, technology changes, and how we do business changes. So professional development is huge, whether you're brand new or an experienced assessor. The IAAO is a great resource too. They have all sorts of online classes and opportunities to really get into the weeds, land valuation, mass appraisal, all these different topics. It's all web-based, and a lot of it you can take right online these days. So the International Assessing Association is a great resource. And with that, I thank everyone here, and I'm going to try and see if I can answer a couple of these questions. And then I just wanted to say this program or this video will be on the YouTube page if anyone wants to go back at any time. So just bear with me 1 second. So as far as Theodore had a question about codes used as far as describing finished area or unfinished area. Each CAMA vendor is a little different on their codes, but you have specific codes in your jurisdiction. I believe you can add to those too if there's something unique that you want to add. But the codes usually come from the CAMA system, and you can go to the sketch to find out what codes your community uses. Yes, this presentation will be online. Are these available for local cable broadcasts? I think there's an opportunity for us to get this out as a possibly as a video file, but let me check with Frank on that. As far as issues with plans, so plans are public documents. So as far as plans that are filed at the Registry of Deeds, you can actually search to see if those plans are there. And I would say that most communities, once the planning board signs off on any zoning or any plan, that it's recorded at the Registry of Deeds. I don't know if that would fall under the MGL 143, section 61. But I know it's a public document if they sign off on it. So just establishing that relationship with whoever's in that office and just showing them why you need that information. You know, you're trying to capture growth or protect the city or town for liability if you have the wrong thing in the CAMA or the assessment system. So maybe just a one-on-one with whoever's in charge of that. I was able to establish a pretty good connection when I was working as an assessor, that they would send me everything. You know, when new plans came out, they would send it. But sometimes it's just worth an explanation and establishing that relationship with whoever has those plans, either in planning office or in the building department. But building permits should be accessible, and I would work with the staff there just to establish a relationship. All right. Well, at this time, I'm going to close it out. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, bladata@dorstate.ma.us. And I want to thank everyone. And we'll definitely have some more topics, maybe diving a little deeper into some of these items that were mentioned here. And thank you for watching.